Okay.
All right, this is your boy D back with another video on You Can Be Free. I have my sister in Christ with us tonight, Markeisha. She's going to be sharing her story. And we've been talking about this, for about a couple of weeks now?
Mm-hmm.
We were supposed to record Saturday, but like with my other guests, sometimes things just happen. Sometimes it's the enemy, sometimes it's life. But without further ado, I just want to pass you the mic so you can share your story from any part of your story that you want to share.
Okay. I guess I'll just talk about my early years. I was I'm the youngest, so I had an older brother who's now in heaven. I had a sister that was born before I was, and then she passed away before I met her. So
Can you
I was
talk
just
about
kind
where
of,
you from? Because you from my state. Well, I don't
yes,
know if you're from there, but I know you live there now.
I'm from Smyrna, Tennessee.
Okay. Okay. Shout out to Smyrna.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just talking about my earlier years. Um, was very quiet, very timid. And my brother was 8 years older than I was. I'm not sure how much older my sister would have been, older than me. She was born with hydro, where her head was extremely larger than her body.
Mm.
So there was like only certain pictures, that I remembered of her. And then, like I said, my brother was 8 years older, very sweet, very kind. Grew up with a single mother. And I knew of my father, but never knew my father. I seen my father only twice in my life. One time I was like 4, maybe 5, at a funeral. I remember these memories. God started giving me these memories, and I remember him like holding me, but I never really knew who he was. Um, so fast forward a little bit, to just always, being with my mom and my brother. That was just kind of, like my family unit. My family was kind of close. Kind of touching on some things that I think probably started very young, that as God was starting, I would say about 2020 when COVID hit. And we were in the house kind of isolated. That's when I started, because I was working from home at that time, like memories and things started coming back. So I do remember there was some times I think I had said sexually abused, but I actually looked up the terminology because I wanted to get it right. I was actually experienced some molestation, and they were like isolated events, so they weren't consistent. It wasn't the same person. I think there was one time there was a slumber party, and it was actually like a family friend. So that only happened once. And
It
then there
was
was
one
like
of the family members of a person that you were with, like one of
well,
your
it was
friends.
actually like it was one of my brother's friends. He had came over, and this is before we even moved to Smyrna. So back then, so I had to really be small, like 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
But God brought that to my remembrance. So that happened, and then there was one time it was like just another isolated event, and I think we were still in Murfreesboro before we moved to Smyrna. So it happened when I was like very small. And so I wanted to get that right because I realized, as I would meet people in life, like I realized that some people that were abused for like a longer period of time, they went through a lot of turmoil. So I'm thinking that, even though it happened to me, because it was like kind of in spurts, that I kind of suppressed it. So I didn't really remember it because it wasn't something that was constant. So that was something that I felt like kind of led on, into my life. Um, and like I said, I was just kind of always quiet, never really got in trouble. And I was very sheltered too, which like my grandmother was very protective. So it was kind of like it almost makes me wonder if something had happened to her because of her protection of me. Like when people think back, they would laugh. They was like, girl, you could never get out the house to do anything. And she was just always like very protective. But I understand, kind of why. So kind of fast forward to like, I guess teenage years, still kind of quiet. And something that I do remember, like my mom cleaned houses a lot, and she cleaned houses for teachers. And so um, there was one time I remember them saying, they was a lot of people call me Nikki. They was like, Lucy, Nikki is very quiet. Like, I believe I had this sense of quietness that was not normal. And especially them being in education and knowing children, they kind of realized, that something wasn't right, because I was just, almost like selective mutism, like that quiet. But and then I would always play with like younger people. So I think that kind of came about too, maybe, and not realizing it, like I really didn't feel safe. So fast forward into like my adolescence. I got pregnant early. So um soph- sophomore year, I had my daughter. And I was held back. So I was actually 17 when I was a sophomore. So I got pregnant with her, 16 turning 17. So literally when I turned 17 on March 3rd, she was born the next month, April 12th. So kind of just even my adolescence, thinking back to like even relationships that I had, I didn't have many, but once God started revealing to me, I was always wonder why I was attracted to people that would naturally be abusive, whether it was verbally or just assert themselves, because I had such this quietness and kindness about me. And then almost like naiveness, as well. Because even when I remember, like, even when I found out I was pregnant, I had told you a little bit about that I was so naive, like, I didn't realize that I could have possibly been pregnant. Now, yes, we were, intimate without any protection, but I was like, me and my mom never had those discussions. Like, I was so green that, you know, I didn't even really knew what what could get me pregnant, if that makes sense, even though I was having sex or whatever. So I remember when I found out, this is something I didn't tell you, like I remember hiding it because I was so slim back then. And when it finally came out to my mom, like I even think about the lengths I went through once I found out that I was pregnant to hide it. Like this is something like my family don't even really know, but like I remember hiding being pregnant, but I was secretly excited. So it was like this combative, inside thing that I had or whatever. And so I was like so relieved once my mom found out. And so I just thought about how God spared me, because I'm like, no prenatal care. I'm already, young. And it's like my daughter came out like extremely healthy, but I was so slim and so small when I went to get the ultrasound. Um, they didn't know how far along I was, of course, because I was just getting the ultrasound. But they found out, but I had drank, back then you had to drink so much water where they could see. Well, my daughter was just flipping around and doing all these things. And so yeah, just me being so small and hiding it. I probably was about 5 or 6 months.
Mhm.
And so it was only like me and my mom. So that was something that, I went through. And then I think over time, just kind of like that spirit of just, being shameful, because it was like I was and I remember everybody saying that to me, like, just walking down the halls. And at that time, I mean, it just seemed like everybody was, people you wouldn't even expect having babies. We were having babies or whatever. But I remember a lot of people would say to me that, man, I'm just so surprised. You just so quiet. You just so this. So then this, you have this excitement, but you really shouldn't be excited because, well, society, you shouldn't be excited because, you're a teenager, but it's like you're excited. But then, I remember my grandmother was upset. Like she didn't talk to, it wasn't long, but like she didn't talk to me. And then like some of my little cousins that I used to hang out with, like they couldn't come to the house no more. So then it was kind of just like, or maybe they couldn't, or we just kind of fell off. But it was kind of like, you grown pretty much now, you in high school, but you got a baby. So just kind of that in between. So then fast forward to the second time I see my dad, I'll go ahead and go to like finishing up high school. Well, even in adolescence, I kind of had some sexual abuse, in relationships, and we kind of talked about that. So that happened as well.
When
So
you say
then,
in relationships, are you talking about with men that were your boyfriends?
yes, men, that was my boyfriend. Well, it was really only one that was my boyfriend. It was actually my child's father. So it was like he was my boyfriend. We had a child together. And then before we had the child, that's when the incident had occurred.
No, for
It was
those that don't know, when you say abusive, are you talking about abusive mentally, physically, or sexually?
one point sexually, towards the end physically, and then mental, like that mental emotional, like just, I was already very sensitive. So, just kind of that mental abuse, like to make you feel, insecure or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so that's when I say abuse, I do need to tailor it because I do feel like I experience like different types of abuse. So
Right.
sexual abuse, mental abuse, emotional, and then physical. Not physical a lot because it only took me once, but he was starting to try to get physical um towards the end. And I do think for like a long time, I think I was like bruised at the bone. I remember one time he just headbutted me out of nowhere. Like no argument, no nothing. Cause I mean back then I barely cussed, I wouldn't do any of that. So I mean there was just really no reason other than just trying to control. Um very type of kind of controlling type of person. Um, so yeah, that's the type of abuse I had experienced probably before the age of 21. So just, in your adolescence, you're very susceptible to things. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of shapes everything, afterwards. So let's see. I think I had my daughter. So I graduated from high school with my class. And so this is the second time I met my dad. So my dad was able to come to my graduation. And, at the time, we weren't allowed to speak or wave or do anything. So this is something that just haunted me for years. Um, I remember them telling us, at Smyrna High, that was like, don't wave, don't do anything, or you won't get your, diploma at the end. So I'm always like the person always trying to do the right thing. So I'm like scared to death, nervous or whatever.
Hold on, hold
So
on. I didn't even notice about this. Y'all couldn't wave.
like they were like, just sit still, just focus on at the time. So like, or maybe I interpret it because I do realize at times I would interpret things a different way. It was like the enemy would have like this extreme amount of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm just sitting there. And so my daddy just waving and waving. I'm thinking to myself, dog, won't he quit waving at me? I can't wave. So I'm
Okay,
just
I
sitting
got you.
there
Right.
and just focusing on my name being called and everything because it was just big. I was always really quiet, so just to even get up and go get my diploma was going to be a lot for me.
Mm-hmm.
So just really nervous or whatever. So getting back to the story, he was waving, and so go through the ceremony, and then at the end we had to go get our diplomas and take our pictures. So it was taking a while. So I didn't get to see him. Like he ended up having to leave because he was married to someone at the time. And so I found out years later that his wife had been cutting up, acting a fool because he had came to the graduation or whatever. So I didn't get to see my dad. So that was something that always haunted me because we never talked. I had a relationship. So I remember thinking like I used to have this thing like, dang, I didn't even get to wave at him. I didn't talk to him. And so then I had this anger because I was like, well, I didn't feel like I should have to reach out. I didn't feel like I should have to do anything. I felt like he should have waited. Then I felt like, I had started to have this hardness in my heart. So then, I didn't really reach out. And I would talk to my aunt, which is his sister or whatever, but, I never really would just ask about him or whatever. So fast forward, he passes away. So mind you, I've only seen him twice, never heard his voice. I do remember seeing him when I was little. And so he died years later. But like I harbored those feelings because I think it was before I was 30 he passed away. Maybe
Mm.
I don't really remember. But so mind you, from 19 to whenever he passed away, like, I only had seen him twice, never heard his voice. So, and I never really thought that affected me. And so fast forward, I have my second daughter at 21, got into that relationship. He was older. Um, he was more verbally abusive and he drank a lot. And I didn't really drink. So I didn't really realize it was a lot. But I remember my mom would come to the apartment and, she would help pick up or whatever. And she would notice like all the beer bottles in the thing. But, it was like I was so green and naive to stuff. I didn't really pay it attention. And it was like literally how women say when you get abused, it is literally like that. Like you will meet a person, and if you've never been exposed, you don't drink, you don't do anything, you know, you just start to realize, like, dang. And he would like, now that I think back when I see him, now that my youngest daughter, she'll be 22, but she's 21 now, and I see him, like, if you see him, you would not think this man would have been like just ranting and raving for like nothing for hours. And I remember I would never cry,
Mhm.
you know. And so I would just hold all this stuff in. And so I guess fast forward, never really having successful relationships, but I would stay in them chunks of my life. Like um, when I met my youngest daughter's dad, I was 19. So 19 to like 27. I may have stayed single a few years. Then I got with my son's father at almost 30. Then I had my son at 34. So God started to reveal to me like um, just my life. Kind of, in 2020, I started looking at chunks. I'm like, well, dang, and I had suppressed the abuse. And then it was starting to, when you're in the house, you restless, you can't really just be busy. And
Mhm.
so you start to, like binge watching movies and stuff. And then it's like, wait a minute, stuff starts to come into your mind. And so when I started looking at my life, I'm like, man, I spent so many chunks, in dysfunctional areas, but I still went to school. And did certain things. So for me, I had wrote down what I had been delivered from, because as I started to really get closer to God, I
Mhm.
was able to see different spirits that was connected to me, that was allowing me to like attract certain people, to experience certain things. Um, and everything just began to like, when I really started just drawing closer to him, things really started to make sense. And I was like, okay, I could really place like why my behaviors, because a lot of times for women, and people that, I guess they don't mean to be rude, but they'll be like, well, girl, if it was that bad, why did you stay? You know what I'm saying? It's a shameful thing. Like, you know, you you just in it. You know what I'm saying? You trying to make it work. For me, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna get married this time. We're gonna be a family. And to the point where, I guess sometimes when people are wrong for you, I believe it is true. They'll continue to do things to where you have to leave them alone. Well, for me, dealing with this spirit of rejection, it took a lot. You know what I'm saying?
So a second ago you was talking about there's some spirits that you got free from that you felt like that was leading you into these relationships. Is rejection one of them?
Yeah, rejection was really the main. I feel like under rejection, that was one of the main things that would allow me to stay in relationships like that. And then thinking about it, even from being the child, I feel like the spirit of rejection would attract me to those people. And then I feel like even being and I just feel comfortable to say this because we're just talking about relationships. Even for me, I felt like even having those things happen to me as a child, like there was a spirit of perversion that was connected to me because I would be in these relationships with people. And I mean, just nonstop, just constantly wanting to be intimate. You know what I'm saying? To the point where, that's not really on my mind. Like I got kids, I'm trying to clean up, I'm in school, I work, When I think back to these situations, like when God really started showing me things, I'm like, okay, well, that opened that door because I used to wonder, I'm like, I'm not even just I would just feel like I wasn't even doing anything for all of that to just really be wanted. You know what I'm saying? And so God
You
started
go
revealing.
further. Before you go further, I want to talk about this. I want to address this because this is a real thing that people don't realize is spiritual. There are people who've been through what you went through, but I've known stories where, men and women have been raped, molested at 5, at 9, at 12, 13, 15. It seems like it's following them throughout their life, and they don't really understand that. Now, sometimes, and a lot of times, it's a generational thing. What happens is
Mhm.
that we're fighting the demons of our fathers or mothers that they didn't break it. But a lot of times, if people look along the lines of they ask their father questions, their mother questions, grandparents, they'll see uncles, aunts, this is a generational cycle that is repeating. And
Mhm.
also too, so you had mentioned rejection. I'm going to talk about that, but then also too, you had said in your story how you were talking about how it seemed like you were drawn to like certain kind of men. I was just having a conversation with somebody, I think it was like a week or two ago, and they were talking about how, they were drawn to a particular type of person and they couldn't break away from this person. Actually, it was two different cases like this. One was with a woman who couldn't let go of a man, and the man was like beating her up and all this type of stuff, and she just couldn't let him go. And she knew that this is something, that it's something spiritual. And a lot of times, the world will just be like, oh, it's just the sex. The sex is too good and stuff like that. But what actually happens in a lot of cases like that, when it's a woman attached to a man, that man has been, had some type of childhood trauma of molestation, of rape, and so there's something that latches on to him, because I did a video talking about sexual soul ties that form through trauma. So when that
Mhm.
person comes like really lustful and has a lot of sex and stuff like that, they have spirits of lust that are attached to them. And then so that woman is attached to what is attached to him. Now, on the flip side, and when we're talking about like rejection, people that have dealt with rejection and stuff, that's oftentimes a generational thing too. What happens is that I'm not trying to put this on you or make this your story, but you never know, as far as like in the family line, your father could have been rejected by his father, and then so there could be something going on that is following down that pattern. And then when you do get with people, it's like hard to leave because the spirit of rejection wants things to work out with people. And I've seen that go like two different ways. Some people that are dealing with rejection, they cut people off quick because a person don't answer the phone call or they don't text back fast enough, or because they start to remember, this happened to me before. And so that spirit of rejection wants to keep that person in isolation, don't want that person to be married, don't want that person to be with the right person. They want them to stay in isolation. So the spirit of rejection will actually keep you from good people and have you with the wrong people, because it's meant to destroy
Mhm.
your life, And it's interesting how, when I've heard stories like this time and time again, to where people will want to stay with somebody that's bad for them, or you're consistently drawn to that same type of spirit, just a different body, but it's the same spirit that will abuse you. But I just wanted to talk about that because a lot of people don't understand that, like the Bible says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Now, I'm not saying this is always the case in every situation. It's different strokes with different folks. But a lot of times this is a pattern. It's a spiritual pattern, and there's something else going on in the spirit realm. But continue. I just wanted to say that so we could, explain for the viewers.
And you know what? That is so true because as I was doing my studying on that, I realized it had come. This is just me hearing stories, right? How you said it was generational. So for me, I started looking at first, I just stopped right with my mom, right? Because what happened was I figured when I was reading my book that I was telling you about, it says it can happen in the womb, the spirit of rejection. So for me, I felt like my mom having my sister that passed away with the hydrosyphilis, I'm not saying it right, but with the big head or whatever, she was always afraid to lose me. So I had also, not only with the spirit of rejection, I had also, I had done a video when I realized, and I had put it on my Facebook once I realized that I was no longer captive of the spirit of fear. I had this abnormal, I'm talking about like, most people don't like scary movies because they've seen them. I was so scared and I used to cry so much. And when I went to school for teaching and psychology, I started to realize like, I learned these things throughout my life, like, dang, something really wasn't right. But I still wasn't making those connections or whatever. So back to the spiritual thing that it was passed down because actually my dad's mother had passed away. So I learned that from my aunt. So they grew up without their mother and then he married someone else. And then like I feel like for my mom, it could have possibly been, you know, it could have also come from when she was carrying me, the fear of losing my sister. And then the fear of like, and it wasn't that she was actually rejecting me. It was just those feelings. And so a lot of these things, like you said, it does come about while a child is in the womb. So I made those connections. And then also, if I even want to just for a little bit go back, I remembered learning like my grandmother was like of 13 kids, and she was named after one of her aunts. And so she was given to an aunt to be raised for a little bit. And there was like 13 of them. So, like even that, so God started to reveal to me because I had stopped with my mama and I was like, well, maybe that's why mama. And then also the fear of something too, because my mom never drove, very, very nervous until this day. And I remember crying, and I love my mom, and everybody loved my mom. But I remember like people really don't know people like somebody, like you know. So it's just kind of like I remember like I don't want to be like that. Like good as gold will give you anything, but just like now that God showed it to me, like that's a spirit, like that is not, like you're afraid to do things before you even try them, and like some people don't realize like that's just a spirit of hindrance. That's a spirit of fear. Like there's a lot of things that keep us from being who we really desire to be. And it is generational. So that was something that I just remembered hearing conversations and I was able to make connections. So then that's where I realized, like, oh, this was passed down to me generationally. You know what I'm saying? It made sense why it was so profound to me. Like, I remember being in church and I would tell my kids this. Even when I got saved, it wasn't even a traditional way. Like, I had my youngest daughter, and I remember being in church, and every time they would close the doors, or open the doors to go up where you can be saved, it was like I can only explain it. Like something is grabbing my feet. Like I want to go up there, but I would never
Mm.
because the fear of people looking at me, the fear of going up in front of the church, just things like that. And so once God started to reveal to me, like, or once, this has just been within the 3 years, I started to think about my life. I'm like, that was an extreme amount of fear. Like, I can't even put it into words how it felt, but it was like paralyzing. That's
And it
that's
does
that's
that to
what.
people too. A lot of times when people are dealing with the spirit of fear, they'll have a lot of sleep paralysis. And when a person is going through sleep paralysis, that's actually a demonic attack, but they can't move. You know,
I used to
you
have
can't
that.
speak, you can't do anything. You can barely, you know, a lot of people will try to get out words and they'll try to say the name of Jesus, but that spirit would actually keep you from getting out, because the Bible talks about how demons tremble at the name of Jesus. Something I want to talk about before we move on, and then I want to after I say this, I want to talk about what your process of deliverance and how did that look like for you. But you had mentioned how, you know, the spirit of rejection and perversion, those was two spirits that you had named. And that's something that I wanted to talk about too, because people don't realize how those things can work together. And a lot of times, you know, on the man side of it that struggle with pornography, they don't realize that lust is actually a secondary emotion, just like anger. But the root of that comes from what I call sometimes the strong man. And the Bible talks about the strong man. And what happens with a lot of people, like going back to pornography, or I'll say corn, because on YouTube, we're not supposed to say that word, but going back to when people watch a corn, that addiction comes from rejection because they are dealing with some type of rejection in their life. But when they're watching that stuff, they can control that. They're not being rejected in that. So a lot of times people will have a bad day at work where they was rejected. They didn't get the promotion or they got denied something. They'll go home and watch that. But that just goes from a deeper root, you know what I mean? Of when they wasn't spending time with their father and stuff like that. A lot of times, like in women, people, you know, see a woman on social media and she's dressing really provocative and stuff like that. That's because she's looking for attention, you know, and they'll do different things, you know, but that's just an example that I have seen where the spirit of rejection and perversion are working together. And what happens is the spirit of perversion actually feeds that strong man of rejection. And a lot of times
Mhm.
people will try to spend time going through deliverance from lust or perversion when really that is just a secondary thing of something that is deeper, you know, deeply rooted, which is like a generational thing of rejection. But what was your process like of deliverance from fear, you know, all this stuff? Because you were saying you wasn't able to get in front of people, but here you are now. Even though we're not from in front of a crowd, it's hard for a lot of people to get up here and talk about this stuff and tell their story. So evidently you got delivered, but what did that look like for you? Some people, you know, talk about how they was fasting, and it happens, you know, differently with people, but how did your process look like?
My processor really started when I started spending time with God. So trying to, and it was hard at first. Like I couldn't get in the Bible first. So I would try to, like read the little daily devotionals with Bible passages. So after I would get the Bible passage, then I would go in the book and then read a little bit. So it kind of started with that. It honestly, for me, my deliverance started with spending time with God and really wanting to dig deeper, because initially what happened was there was this one big rejection that kind of threw me into like a tailspin. And it kind of, oh, I didn't even, this was important too. When I was pregnant with my daughter, something that my her dad did. And then I'll connect it at the end. But what he did when I was pregnant, and like once this was before our parents knew. So I would call, after school, never answer the phone. You know what I'm saying? Like this is going on and on. Like, so now we both know about this, but you constantly like rejected me, like I'm just wanting a conversation, trying to figure out, what we're going to do or whatever. So, that's that. So like in 2020, yeah, it was right. 2020 was ending. And so I had met this individual, and I should have more paid attention to what his words, and that's another thing as women sometimes too. Like you'll see women holding on to things that they're not even really like they're not even a relationship at all. You know what I'm saying? And now I realize like not only was there scales over my eyes, for a long time there was scales over what I would hear. Like, and I started, once God started delivering me, I could hear. what people were saying to me, but it would be in different capacities when I was dealing with all these different spirits on me. Like, especially with the I also put like a spirit of comparison. Like I would compare myself. I was never competitive, but it was always like I could literally just see something on somebody and I would want it. Like I'll just say like a purse, your nails, like I want this. And I would always compare myself. And even when I went through school. I have an associate's, a bachelor's, and a master's. This is how deep these spirits was on me. I would get into, like, even when I was a para, I got into a program where they only selected like 4 or 5 of us when I
Mhm.
was teaching. Like I did not think I was smart. Like even when I would get into programs, like I remember I had got into this program at Trevecca. Um, my grades and everything was good. And I would literally like just be comparing, like I would almost like always friendly and laughing, but I would almost say not like well, yeah, thank you, Lord. Almost idolizing people with
Mm.
that spirit of comparison, comparing myself, so I had a lot of things going on. So I was just going to say, like, to do all of that. And then God revealed to me, like, how can you never really feel smart? Like, he was giving me all these opportunities and I'm in them, but I never feel good enough. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? And just doing certain things. So back to 2020, had met someone and they were divorced. Said, they really didn't want a relation. Well, no, they kind of acted as if they wanted to hang out, have a relationship or whatever. So then it gets physical. But then what was happening was and God revealed it to me. That's what triggered it. Like then I never had that experience where I'm like, well, dang, at least people at least talk on the phone, get to know somebody. Like, no, nothing. That kind of like did a mental thing, but it drove me to the Lord. But it kind of
So
really
what exactly
served
happened? What happened?
nothing other than like we would sleep together and he wouldn't communicate with me.
Oh, so it was kind of like a friends with benefits, but
Not
no.
even, I don't even feel like it was that, because at least the friends with benefits, I would at least, now I don't know, this is my first time trying that. I would think you would at least talk on the phone or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, so for me, I'm very sensitive. It really hurt my feelings or whatever. So it kind of reminded me, it brought me back to that moment because I was like, I'm talking about full on rejected. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, wait a minute. I never experienced anything like that. Like I always had relationships.
Mhm.
So that's what drove me to really getting closer to God, because it was like this emotional thing. But then also I want to talk about this because it was the sexual snares one that you did. I watched that video.
With Vincent. That's
Yes.
a good
And
one. That's a good one. And
that is a
I want to
great
say, if
one.
anybody who haven't seen that one, watch that video. That was powerful. But go ahead.
It opened up my eyes because I'll be honest with you now, I realized it was a spiritual thing. Um, just the connection, because I'm talking about after that, my whole, like my mental, my emotional kind of changed from that rejection. So I don't know what transpired or what happened, but like it changed me mentally. And it took me, that's the situation that drew me closer to God, because I'm like, when you said earlier, like some people could cut people off, I had got to that point in my life. You do one or two, I'm done, honey. We not talking. And I'm like, I could not move on. It was something like it was controlling me. And so I'm like, this is not me. Like, you just sad, crying. Like this person ain't even thinking nothing about you. And the crazy thing is, we didn't even talk long at all. That's how come I knew it was something else. I'm like, you didn't even know this person, and you about ready to lose your mind, you know? And it was like, a lot of the things that I thought I had overcame, they were coming back. Like, that's when I started, when I told you about the drinking and the smoking, like my nerves got really, really bad, and just from something that small. And so that's why I was like, something else happened, because it was, it sh- from what it was, it shouldn't have transpired how it did. But it was a blessing for me, because what I think too was, it was just the God, not him doing things, but things aligning me to get to where I needed to be with him, because it was always on shaky ground. And I do understand why they say people have to be equally yoked, because you can really know the Lord. But, if you get, and that was another thing, like I would always meet people and they weren't bad, they weren't in the streets, but they weren't like cared about being in church or doing things.
Mhm.
So you do that for years, you begin to get further and further and further away from God. So really this drew me closer to him, because I realized, I'm like, you know what? I want to wait for my husband. There was just certain things I realized, I'm like, this life ain't where it's at, and sin and bondage will actually make you, because in the world, you think sleeping with somebody draws you closer. That don't do nothing, you know and I'm here to tell you, like, you don't be careful, you run up on the wrong thing, it cannot be good, and I know I experienced that, but it drove me closer to the Lord. But I think it ignited all these other spirits, like the rejection became the anxiety, and I never was anxious, the anxiety. Um and so the very first thing I never will forget, I had told you I watched a YouTube. I had started watching like different YouTubes, like pastors and evangelists. And so it was one Saturday, I was watching this lady, her name is Evangelist Sarah. I believe she's like overseas or somewhere. And I was watching her, and this is like, her YouTube channel was little at the time. I think it was only like 20, 30 people on that episode. I even started writing down, I have it somewhere in a book, but I would write down like different lives that I had been taken part of. So there's one where she says my name out loud, and she's talking to me, like she's talking to everybody, but she says my name out loud or whatever. And so she starts to pray for me. And literally, I have not drank. I have not, no, I take that lie back. It was one time I did for my friend's birthday party, and now that's going on a year. It was a year, um, this past August, from when I had taken that drink. But it had already been a year. But I mean, like on that live, and she was praying. And when, I just fully surrendered to the Lord. So what I heard was her breaking it off of me. I was truly delivered through that prayer from the drinking and the smoking. That was the first thing. Um, but once I really started getting in my word, and like really reading, like, making it like an everyday thing, like, I'm talking about, I would be at work, and on my lunch hour, I'm in my word, you know what I'm saying? And I had started the job to where I wasn't teaching anymore. So I could really just, read and study. And so for me, that's how my deliverance came about, really being in my word and intentional. And also like watching different YouTube channels, like people speaking about things that I was intrigued about, because my knowledge became deeper than just, wanting to, how we go to, which nothing is wrong with it, go praise and worship. But that's when I started learning, like, something else going on with me. Remember when I told you, like, sometimes I would be in church and I would have like these flashes, but it would be like, okay, I'm gonna go back to the
Hold
spirit
on.
of perversion.
Okay, go
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 ahead.
back to that, and I got to ask you something.
Okay, so like I'm in church, worshiping, and I mean just something random, like say if I've just say for instance that guy that I had been with, it hadn't even been long. Like I'm talking about full on in church, and then just bam, this vision come in my head. And I'm like, this is something else. Like I'm not thinking about that. And
Mhm.
so that for me was like, I began to really want to research. I'm like, Lord, how many people are really trying to, do the right thing, praise and worship, and are being tortured, with things that they've done and they're trying to come away from. And that's when, once I read that book, I was like, okay, that's what the enemy does. You know, Even when people are, on the right path and trying. So that's what really led me to really um, learn about deliverance. Because, go ahead.
Okay, so you said something interesting because in Proverbs it says the just shall be delivered by knowledge. And you were talking about the more that you were learning, the more free that you have become. And I think that's really powerful to people, for people to know, because sometimes people think they have to, like I said, deliverance can come in many different ways, but just being in your word or just being up under the right teaching, because I remember you was telling me you had heard me say something on YouTube on one of my videos, and when you heard that, you got free. And people don't think about deliverance like that. You can be getting delivered up under a word. And that's why I really respect pastors who talk about stuff that people are really dealing with, because things that people are really dealing with, because there's a lot more than what we go through than your basic teaching, and I'm not saying anything against the word of God, but I'm just saying when you break this word down, and when you like address certain things, because there's a lot of people who be dealing with that. I've done had that happen multiple times at work. I mean, not at work, but at church. I'm praying, I'm praising, and I'm just thinking about all these different thoughts that's coming up on my mind, and I didn't know how to combat that because I never heard anybody talked about it. But something I wanted to ask you, because I lead a group, and one thing that I'm always trying to get people to do is be accountable to reading the word, because all this stuff happens with the process of the renewal of your mind. And it's really hard for me to get people to be in the word, but you had this hunger. Well, I don't know if you had a hunger for it or not, but how you got to the point to where you was living life one way, and then all of a sudden you're reading the Bible every single day at work. Did you have a hunger for that, or was you just so desperate for freedom you just wanted to do that?
Desperate for freedom, and kind of just really this hunger, because it kind of started too with, I knew I always had faith in God. And so once I started reading um the book helped. And then also with I'm sorry, one of my kids opened the door to me, y'all. um the book helped, but definitely because I really was still a baby in the word.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to really get to, like I said, I had to use those daily devotionals. Then I had the apps. And then I had kind of gotten like a study Bible. And so, I would just read stuff and then I would try to relate it to me. And one thing I started doing, because I realized I started praying for discernment. That changed my life, praying for discernment. And then also just I really say also a part of my deliverance was a phase of isolation, because God really had to reveal to me, like, even though you love family and friends, God sometimes has to get you to yourself, like, no, I said come over here. So I had to really be isolated. um and it was okay, because it was like he was turning me to my true self. Because in reality, having a sibling that's 8 years older than you know what I'm saying? By the time I was walking and talking, I was always kind of, by myself. And so I had got to that point where I was comfortable. So then I would, just spend time with God and just reading. So I'll say a lot of mine was just really searching. And you said something that was powerful, because what happened was God dropped this old song in my spirit. And it's I'll just say bits and pieces of it. I won't let go until you bless my soul. Like that dropped in my spirit for about a year or two, and I would not let go. Like I wanted to know, like, you know, why, I even wrote a letter. One thing that helped me too, a lot of people don't realize they worship, but their heart is hardened towards God. So I had wrote down everything that had hurt me. And I can't take credit for this because I had got it from somebody off YouTube. And she had got a lot of flack for saying it, and she had to do another video. But she was like, just one day she was just in the spirit, and I know it was meant for me because I needed to do that. You couldn't have told me that I had hard feelings towards God because I loved him, I worshiped him. You couldn't have told me that. But once I wrote down every hurt that I had, and just kind of asked why, and it was like one night, and one thing I had started doing was praying in the dark at night, where I could really just cry and open up. So it was one night I did that, and I had wrote down, it was like a 3 or 4 day process. I won't even make it that easy. I started praying and just revisiting things, and I had a list, and I wrote it out in questions,
Mm-hmm.
like, why was I molested? Why did I lose my sister? Oh, and I never told you, speaking about my brother too, there's another book that I'm reading as well. But in this book that I was reading too, like, he died of sarcoidosis, and he died very young. you know there's a book that I'm reading now that some certain diseases can be tied spiritually as well.
Mm-hmm.
um so for that, I just started writing things that hurt me, like, losing my big brother. Because, for me, for him to be 8 years older than me, he was very mature. He was very kind. You know, when we didn't have a car, my brother started working early. He would drive us around. He did things like that. So to me, I looked at, he was more than a brother. He was like a father figure.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, just writing down all my hurt. And I'm telling you, like, it's so funny. It was about a year later, I looked at that letter because it's in my journal. I got all my little stuff beside me. But there's a heart. I didn't cry or do nothing when I wrote this. It was just like I had wrote in this journal and went back to it. And it was like God had put a heart on that word, because now my heart was softened. That was my resolution with it, because I had to write down all my hurt. Because sometimes when you will get the word, like, we trust God, and God is God, and it's like, yeah, that is true. But when we really be human, sometimes, because we are his children, so it's like, it's okay, to actually be honest about how you feel. So for me, that did a lot of healing as well. So it's just a lot of stuff I've done that's
I'm
personal.
I'm
Go
so
ahead.
glad that you said that, because I had to do that before and I never heard nobody talk about that. And so I know it was God that led me to do that. And I think that's really important too, because what people are doing, they're going on, they're walking around serving, doing ministry. They're singing, they're worshiping, they're praying, they're going on fast, but they're hurt because they had something happen in their life where trauma come in, or their soul got fragmented, and they're just not addressing that stuff, and they're wondering why they're not getting free. And I just think that's so good for people to do that, to really, address what is bothering you. Because the thing is this, there's a lot of times people have been discouraged in their life where they was believing something strongly and it didn't turn out the way that they wanted to, or they got into a marriage and it failed, and they're really hurt. But because of religion, they're scared to talk about that type of stuff. They're scared to tell people how they really feel. They're scared to address that to God. And then so they're walking around and they're trying to search for freedom and deliverance, but you got this hole that you ain't even addressing, and so in
Mhm.
Mark 11, it talks about Mark 11:23, I think it starts off of having faith in God, and then you can speak to the mountain. But then after that, it says, forgive your brother, forgive any person, if you want to be forgiven. But we have to, like, forgive ourselves too. And we have to forgive God, because we have offenses towards God, but we don't never really address it. Also, too, I think it's really important, for people that are watching this that have experienced some type of rejection from a father or a mother or any type of molestation, to forgive that person. Because people don't realize, you had mentioned, you didn't name this as an addiction, but you were talking about smoking and drinking. A lot of people that are addicted to drugs, alcoholism, and stuff like that, it's tied to rejection, but they just never really face some childhood issues, and they're using these things, whether it be pornography or drugs, alcohol, whatever it may be, to cover up, these things and these wounds. And when they address this stuff, or when they forgive the person that rejected them or hurt them, they're able to find
Mhm.
freedom. And I don't know, just everything that you said, it was really powerful. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on. In closing, is there anything that God is putting on your heart right now for people that will see this, that have been in bad relationships with men, or have had didn't really grow up with a father, whatever that's case may be? You just got anything just in closing?
Yes, really just even if you just start small, in the shower when you're doing something where you're by yourself. Just start talking to God, praying to him. Even if for me, just having questions about why things happened. And I feel like once I started that's when I do got to bring this book up, because I feel like this book is amazing, because you can read, even for a person that may be going through things and don't really want to go to church or do anything, like you can pray, and there's so much in this book where you can kind of um, self deliverance, but it talks about all these different things that can really make you realize what you've been through. Like a period of time where I didn't even dream. It addresses things like that, because you can get so brokenhearted that you don't even dream anymore. Like basic, not even like I'm dreaming for a house, like literally going to sleep and you don't even think you dreaming no more, but you dreaming every night. It's just
Mhm.
that there can be so much demonic stronghold on you being the person you need to be, because it doesn't have to be that grand. Sometimes just your own personal relationship with God can be ministry to your soul, or just getting you to the next level to where you really want to be, but you never can get yourself there, because there are things that are strongholds that are holding you back. you know
And what's the name of
you
that
know,
book? Because we seen
uh,
it, but can you say the
uh,
name and the author?
yeah, yeah, Deliverance from Demonic Covenants and Curses by Reverend James A. Solomon.
Okay.
um
And I'm gonna have to bring you on here again when you write your book, because I feel like there's a lot more to your story. You've told the surface of it, but I see I see a book in you. And so uh
oh, so-
yeah, if that happens in 2024 or the year after, that'd be something we could bring you back for. But again, I want to thank you for your time. And I just want to encourage anybody that is watching this or will watch this that may be dealing with addiction, or your case may be rejection or molestation or perversion. Just know that you can be free, because who the Son has set free is free indeed. We love y'all, and we're praying for y'all.